There he is, okay. Our program this morning is S.D.Dean. S.D. is a native of Kingsport and a Dobbins-Bennett graduate. He's been retired from Air Gas, which most of us, or many of us, remembered as Air Products. And most of his time not spent working was spent as an amateur archaeologist around this area. And he's been recognized and worked in the summers, I guess, with Smithsonian and Carnegie Museums through the years. And in 2006, he got a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Tennessee Division of Archaeology, is that right? So he's a local but nationally known in many cases archaeologist, and we're delighted to have you, SD, so you come on up here.
Appreciate everybody coming out today. What I wanted to talk about is you hear about a lot of archaeological excavations, but you don't really know what goes into. Okay. I need to hold it, or?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me now? Okay. Like I said, a lot of archaeological excavations, even the programs I've given, you look at the program, slides, PowerPoint, whatever, and then you see some of the artifacts and that sort of thing. And I've never given a program, but I thought it'd be interesting to know what happens after the excavation is over. How does this information become meaningful, and how does it evolve so people can learn from it? If this doesn't happen, it ends up on a shelf somewhere or in the basement of a museum. So what I'd like to do today is kind of go into what happens after an excavation is completed. And as an example of an excavation, I brought a few slides of a dig I did at the Eastman Rock Shelter, which is located on the John B. Dennis Bypass. If you're coming off of Interstate 26, going toward the Eastman, right before you cross the river bridge, there's a large cliff on the right, and underneath that cliff is a rock shelter, or a sheltered area that people live. And so I'm going to show a few slides of that, and then I'll come back and tell you what happened after the fact. Okay, I just said where the Eastman Rock Shelter is located. You can see at the head of Long Island, where the air is pointing, is that large cliff. And right underneath that is where the excavation took place. Oh, okay. This is that large cliff. It's on a fault line called the Cliffs Fault. There was a major break in the ground at one time, an earthquake. It's an overthrust fault. If you look at the bottom of it, you can see where I'm standing down there on a pile of sifted dirt, and that's where the shelter is located. Yeah. Okay.
Now, the Indians used that a long time ago?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. This is, it doesn't look like a shelter, like a lot of rock shelters have a roof right over the head, so you can see they might have lived under it. This was kind of deceiving because the sheltered area was several feet high, and actually you don't see it, but there's about 20 feet of dry space from the back wall toward the river that they could have lived in. I had to go to, I'll get into that in a few minutes, but I got permission from the Eastman to go over and do an exploratory dig. First thing I did was did a 5 foot square, took it down 6-inch levels into the ground. This one's kind of dark, but you can kind of see what I saw. The top is all alluvial material that had been deposited on the river, from the river. And I didn't find anything on top of the ground, and because of that, it was sealed under this sand. The darker material underneath there had the cultural material in it. I had taken that first 5 foot square, and it was getting pretty deep. It was getting hard to get in and out of. So what I did some more 5 foot squares and kind of used it as a stepping way to get out. At this time, I wasn't working. I was in between jobs in 70. This is 1979. So I had a good north-south trench that I did originally, and since I wasn't working, I thought I'd go ahead and do another trench back toward John B. Dennis toward the west. One of the things I really didn't expect to be there was burials, but this is one of the first ones I found. It's in a fully flexed position. This shows where it was located in that west trench. And about 10 foot from that one, I found another in a semi-flex position. And there you can see where it's located. If you look at the dark spot just below the knees there, that's a fireplace, a feature that was excavated later. And that one came out up near the dark spot up in the trench. And you can look down a little bit. I found two more coming back toward me here, also in the trench. And if you look on the left, you can see where I've had to start breaking that roof fall of the limestone out with sledgehammers and get it out so I could dig there. This was the excavation. As it continued, you can see the levels going west there, and I've got the large rock out. I'm going to continue taking some more of the dirt out. This was in October of 79, or November of 79 early, and I knew that there was 20 foot of dry space in this back wall out toward the front, but I knew in the wintertime on the upper end up there, the tree line is pretty much the drip line. If you look at the trees there on the right, that is kind of the drip line where if it rains up and snows, that's where the water will accumulate. So at this point, I knew that if I wanted to dig on the upper end, I probably need to go ahead and do that because that was going to be the wettest part. I could dig here on the back, even in the winter. When I took the upper end out, there was two more burials up here on this end. One was a small infant. And there's an adult here, which is kind of unusual. The skull is missing. The lower vertebra and part of the hip is missing. So we don't know what happened. If an animal got to it later, or if they found it maybe somewhere and brought it back and put it in a burial position. This is that burial that I just showed you. At this time, I had the upper end of the shelter was done, and I went back and started taking out the dirt near the wall that was in the dry area. And there I could continue to take out more of that soil on the back. And when I took that out, there was 3 more burials in one burial pit. And that's a close-up of those 3 burials. There's an adult, there's a sub-adult here, and there's a small infant up there on the upper side. And unique about this is that in the chest cavity underneath the sternum, I found a projectile point, what we call arrowheads, actually in between 2 ribs where he had been shot through the front and had been lodged between the 9th and 10th ribs in the back.
What's the scale? The black scale, black and white scale?
That was that large black thing, that was a spear point.
The black and white scale, what is that?
Oh, that's a foot.
Okay.
Yeah. At this point, I had all the burials out. I was probably 2,500 years old at this point. But now I wanted to go on down. I was below all the pottery levels. I wanted to go down and see what was below there because I wanted to see if there was anything older than what I'd seen. This was after my last dig in 79 was in December, and I didn't get back over there during the winter. I came back in March, and this is right when I left. I came over like a week later, And you can see that people knew I wasn't there anymore and they were starting to look for souvenirs. But that's the way it looked about 10 days after I was there. Luckily, I had taken the last feature. It was a storage pit, and I found some actually domesticated sunflower seeds in that. But anyway, after I saw what they were doing, I went ahead and took one square in that area and went straight down. And I got down to about 8.5 feet, and I found another living floor. So I knew I was going to have to come back. So in March, I came back to finish up. And this is what it looked like when I got back. People had really tore it up. But the good thing is there wasn't much in the bottom that I wanted to go on down. So what they were doing, if there's a positive to it, they were taking the dirt and covering the bottom up. So I had to just go back to my original area that I left, and I was able to start again. And this, you can see I cleaned part of it up. And you can see my deep square I left the year before. And I'm starting to go on down to see where I can find the bottom.
That's the tool you use. She had a shovel in her hand.
Square point shovel. This is part of the living floor that I found the year before, about where that piece of string is. And there was some firecrack rock and so forth, so I knew there was something else down that deep. So this is probably in March or April in 1980. And when I cleaned it off, there was a large hearth up on the far right up there. And then over here, the big rocks are just rocks that fell off the wall and the ceiling. Here you can see I'm going on down, trying to find the bottom. You can see the depth by the two shovel handles, the one on the far end of the trench, then the one there in the hole. And I originally found the rock bottom, and you can see there's an 8-foot profile up there on the far wall, and it ended up going 12 feet and 6 inches in the ground, which ended up actually being the deepest rock shelter dug in the state of Tennessee. Some of the artifacts that are found, and that's what I want to talk to you today about, is the material after the fact, after the excavation's over. This is the material that's going to have to be looked at by somebody. Excuse me. There was like 400 pieces of historical material. You can see musket balls, pipe bowl pieces, kale and pipe stems, and so forth that was historic. In fact, one item here is probably a pretty unique piece for Kingsport. It was a lead, looked like a baggage claim tag or something like you see on an electrical box. But on this side it says CC&O Railroad, and on the back side it says Kingsport, Tennessee. So that's probably a pretty good item for historians in the area. Some of the other historical material, some of the old black glass that was probably rum bottles. And you'd expect this type of stuff to be here because Fort Robinson was right across the river in 1761. And in 1775, Patrick Henry sat over there. So then in 1787, I found a reference that William Smith had built his home above the big rock at the head of Long Island. So there was a lot of history right in that one area. This is the flint chips. Most of this is local material. We call it Knox black and gray flint. There was over 19,000 pieces that came out of the rock shelter. Also, the projectile points, or what we call arrowheads, there was like 750 that came out of there. This is the faunal material of the animal bone. And there was over 40,000 pieces of bone that came out of there that was going to have to be looked at. This is charcoal, which does several things. One, you can get a carbon-14 date. If you can identify the wood, you can tell that what type of vegetation was here. Most of it was conifer and hardwoods. But if I'd seen stuff in there like spruce and that type of thing, that would indicate a real early climate, which I didn't find that, but that's the benefit of looking for charred wood. This is a some firecrack rocks that came out of the hearth. What I've done, I glued them back together. These rocks were lined in these pits, and they were heated, and they would, when they heated and cooled, eventually they would break apart and spall. And I put these back together, but one of the rocks that came out, one of the features was sent to Washington University in St. Louis, and they did what they call a thermoluminescence date on it. But I'll get into that in just a moment. Shellfish, the mussel shell on the left, they ate mussels out of the river. The shells right beside of it looked like marine shells. It was an IO shell. It's probably a Nio spinosa. And these used to be in our rivers. They used them for food, but the rivers are too polluted, and with the dams here, they're no longer available. And pottery, there was over 9,000 pieces of pottery that came out of the rock shelter that was going to have to be looked at. Okay. That's it, I think, Collins.
What you do with those skeletons, S.D.?
They're at ETSU right now. I guess we need the light on. I'll tell you about what happened.
I lost count. How many skeletons were there?
There were 11 skeletons altogether. I'll give you a little bit of background information that led up to this, then I'll tell you what happened as far as the analysis of the material that was found. I first had visited this rock shelter in 1964, and at that time there was only two ways to get there. You could wade the sluice at the head of the island, or you could work yourself off a crooked road, which is now Moreland Drive. You could work yourself around the bottom of that cliff over to it. And all the locals called it the Big Rock. And I moved out of the area from 1971 to 1979. And when I came back in 79, I was really surprised it was still there, because there's local clubs that done a lot of excavations in the area. And it being right in the city limits, well, it's outside the city limits, but right into the town of Kingsport, I expected it would be dug, but it wasn't. So what I did in October of '79, actually I was in between jobs, thank goodness at that time. I went to the Eastman and went to the public relations department, talked to Mr. Lynn Johnson, and asked him if I could do a test excavation over there in that rock shelter. And of course, the first thing he asked her is, "Who are you?" You know. And I told him that I had done some avocational. I didn't do it professionally, but I'd done some archaeology work. And he said he'd have to go to Toy Reed and see if they'd give me permission. And about a week later, I got a letter, and they gave me permission to dig on their property. And also, I had asked him during our meeting if I did find something, how much of it did they expect out of that? And in the letter, it said they were in the chemical and plastics business, and they weren't interested in artifacts, so I basically had control of everything that was found. I also probably stretched it a little bit. I asked them if they could provide security when I wasn't there, and at that point, they said that they would not provide security, but I was pretty happy with what I got. And I found out a year or so later that they had called Dr. Faulkner at the University of Tennessee, Dr. Charles Faulkner, and told him that I was wanting to dig. I didn't know this when I first went over there, but when they talked to him, he told them that he didn't know I did archaeology, but he remembered me doing work in vertebrate paleontology with Ice Age animals and stuff I found in the area. So he told them that he thought it would be okay, from what he remembered that I'd done with Carnegie Museum, that it would be okay. So that's how I got permission, and they didn't know it at the time. But once I had permission in October of '79, I went over and did a test excavation, which you saw the first square I dug. And I dug in October, November, December 1979. And then I left, and during this time, I knew I was getting a lot of material. I knew I had a lot of records and stuff that would be beneficial. So I called the University of Tennessee and told them what was going on, and they said they were busy doing the Tellico Dam project on the Little Tennessee River, and they really didn't have anybody available to look at anything. So I asked if I could come down with some of the material and the records and so forth and show them. They said, yeah. So I went down and made a presentation. And once they saw the age, the material, and how much, and nobody really knew much about the archaeology up here in '79. So they agreed to see what they could do. They showed interest in what I was doing, told me to stay in touch with them. So I came back, and during that winter, I washed some of the material I had and began cataloging it. And then in March of 1980, I went back to the shelter and dug another 3 months. I finished up in May of 1980. And so now the question is, after it's all over, what do? You got all this material. And so during that period of time after May, I started doing all my papers and drawings that had accumulated over there. One thing I did a site survey sheet for the state of Tennessee. This turned out to be site number 40, SL 34. 40 is a designation for Tennessee, Sullivan County, SL. That's the 34th site in the county that was recorded. I did plan drawings of the shelter and the contour of each level and what was dug from a plan view from the top. I found 68 different features, including fire pits, storage pits, refuge pits, and had to do my drawings and so forth of all of that. So I had plenty of work to do after I got through. And the burial records, each burial was recorded and photographed and drawn. Also, the soils and the sediments from the river. You had colluvial material coming from the upper part of the shelter off the land. You also had alluvial material coming in from the river.
Excuse me, alluvial, would you define alluvial?
It's been displaced like sand or something that the river has washed and redeposited over top of the, it's just the sand that's been moved, sediments. Okay. So at this time, I contacted UT again and told them I was finished digging, told them what I had, and they told me at that time that there was a student that was looking at maybe doing a master thesis on maybe something that I dug up here. That now, like I said earlier, now that all this has been done, the records are finished, the artifacts are finished. I completed washing this 70,000 pieces of material. All of it was cataloged, but now what do you do with it? So this is basically kind of what I wanted to get to today is what happens after you do an excavation. And so what happened next is the University of Tennessee called Tennessee Eastman Company and told them the importance of the site for this area. And Lynn Johnson, and I think maybe another person, went to the University of Tennessee and talked to them about it, and the Eastman gave $11,000 grant for the research. And when they did that, the National Endowment for the Humanities also had a challenge grant that for every $3 that the university raised, they would match it with $1. So they also got another $3,666 from the National Endowment to study this. And now I'd like to go into each of the items. I told you there were 70,000 pieces of material. So I'll kind of give you a background of kind of who did what and so forth that came out of this dig. Like I said a while ago, there were 68 features, fire pits, storage pits, refuge pits. All of this was done at the University of Tennessee. Gary Kreitz, student, got a scholarship from this money to study this. All the dirt was floated. What they put it in water. You can basically stir it up or shake it, and all the material that's been burnt, like nutshells and so forth, float to the top and can be recovered. And most of the material he found, this is what we call flora, or the plant materials. So that's what he was doing. And he found burned hickory nut, walnut shells, conifer, hardwood, charcoal. And like I said a while ago, he found the domesticated sunflower seeds in one of the features. And it turned out to be 2,394 years old, and was the first domesticated plants or seeds that had been found in Upper East Tennessee at that time. Next, I had a lot of charcoal that I set down. Dr. Faulkner had talked to the Smithsonian about how important this site might be. They did 8 carbon-14 dates at no charge. And later, ETSU did an additional 4 with grant money that they had accumulated from different projects. So we had a total of 12 carbon dates from this shelter. And the dates on the charcoal ran from 4,850 years old down to 1,070 years old. That's what the carbon-14 dates came out. Also, I mentioned during the slides that I sent some rocks to Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri, and they did a thermoluminescence dating technique, which was one of the first that ever been done in the state of Tennessee, and the rocks that they checked came back 3,500 years old. They came out of that fire pit. And all of this was published in 2 of the journals that came out at that time. Was the Tennessee Anthropological Association newsletter. Dr. Faulkner and I did a preliminary article in '82. And the early dates, the carbon dates and the thermoluminescence dates came out also in later '82 in the same manual. The faunal material, or the animal material, 40,964 pieces of bone came out of that rock shelter. Bruce Manzano was a student that I mentioned a while ago that was maybe interested in doing a master thesis. He got a scholarship to study the faunal material, and he did do his master thesis on the bone material off the Eastman Rock Shelter. So that turned out pretty well. The notable finds, the animal bones, there's a big list of animals that came out of there. In fact, there's pages of them. You can imagine beaver, possum, everything that's still here. But there was some animals that no longer live here, such as porcupine, cougar, elk, and whistling swan. Those 4 animals no longer live here. And there were 2 extinct animals that came out of there. One was a passenger pigeon, which is extinct, and the other one was a fish with a weird name. It's called a hair-lipped sucker fish. H-A-R-E-L-I-P, sucker. But this was in fact, in the masterpieces, Bruce stated, this is the first known record of this species from an archaeological site. It is a significant find because only one skeleton of this fish exists. What happened in the early 1900s, the fish was here in their rivers, but nobody knew it was going extinct. So nobody collected any of the bones. And then they found out that after the fish was extinct, people were starting to look around for what bones were available, and the Smithsonian had only partial skeleton, 90% of one skeleton. So at the Eastman Rock Shelter, I found like 113 different bones that belonged to this extinct fish. So it turned out to be a real important. In fact, some of the people that thinks that's probably the most important thing found over there because we had so much more information to study it by now. The human burials. Y'all want me to continue, or? Okay. The human burials. Okay. The human burials, they were analyzed by the Physical Anthropology Department at the University of Tennessee at no charge. And there were 11 total skeletons. There were 5 adults. There were 2 males and 3 females. And then there were 6 subadults, and 2 of those were infants. And I guess I should mention, these were dug prior to the laws that changed in 1987, which the the Native American Graves Protection Act, after 1987, it basically was illegal to do any kind of excavation without some kind of an order from the government agency or the court or something to do that. The shales from the river, Dr. Paul Parmalee at UT analyzed the shale material. Used to be there were 35 different mussel shells that lived in our rivers, and now they were all pretty much eradicated. They no longer live here, and the only thing we got living in our area today on the rivers and the dams is the invader species. We do not have any natural mussel shell here anymore because, like I said, because of the pollution and the dams that are built. In one paper that was written by Dr. Parmalee and Richard Polhemus that came out in 2004 in the Southeastern Naturalist, he said until the excavation of the Eastman Rock Shelter and the recovery of shell remains, nothing was known of the prehistoric mussels of the South Fork Coastal River. No one had ever looked at what mussel populations and shell populations we had up here. And with the Eastman Shelter, they had, I don't know how many, probably over 1,000 pieces of shell material to look at and got an idea of what the river had once looked like. Next were the ceramics. I found 9,100 pieces of pottery sherds. And again, a scholarship was given to one of the students at the University of Tennessee. The dates ranged in the pottery from 3,000 years ago to about 500 years ago. And significant thing with that is the natives used tempering agent with their clay to help it so it wouldn't crack during the firing process. And they usually use limestone, shale, sand, grit, and so forth out of the rivers. And this was the first time that we'd seen some soapstone, which is North Carolina and Virginia material, it's not local, and also some chert that they had crushed up and mixed with their clay. So this is the first time that these two tempers had shown up in Upper East Tennessee. The lithic material, which is all the stone, the work stone, the tools, their projectile points, and so forth. There was 18,648 pieces of this material. Again, a student at UT got a scholarship to analyze and study this. There were 750 projectile points, approximately. These are what we call arrowhead spear points. Came out of the dig. The historical material, there was 400 pieces. Dr. Faulkner at UT briefly analyzed it. There's not been anything written up on it specifically. But there were such things I showed you, like gun flints, musket balls, kale and pipe stems, and that sort of thing. And then the soils and the sediments. Bruce Manzano, when he did his master thesis, also included this. I had Dr. Ken Hasson at ETSU and Charlie Bartlett from Abingdon, geologist, to come over and explain some of the things that went on there, like they talked about the cut and fill process and the colluvial material and all that sort of thing. And so you can see from where I started with the excavation and all the material was ready. So when the money was given, people were put in place to, each person was able to look at their own specialized field of study and make the information that I dug meaningful. There's been several articles and papers written. I just showed you the one on the shales and some of the other material that came out of there. There's been specific papers on the fish, extinct fish. The Eastman Shelter has been referenced in, I don't know how many articles. Sometimes I'll pick up a book and it'll reference something about the Eastman Rock Shelter in it. But there was 5 scholarships were awarded from the money that was gotten from the Eastman and the National Endowment. There was one master thesis that came out of it. And the collaboration that what had happened after the dig, we had the Smithsonian involved, University of Tennessee, 4 different departments. Of course, the Eastman, Washington University, ETSU, Tennessee Division of Archaeology, National Endowment. So you can see it started just a dig, small dig, and it just evolved to where you had people from all over. given material and been able to study it. And Dr. Faulkner, in one of the articles, said that this was the deepest rock shelter that had been excavated in Tennessee, and contained one of the best records of prehistoric occupation so far excavated from the site in the northeastern Tennessee Valley. So you can see how important it became after it all. And again, you know, after we do an excavation, you never hear about it anymore. You know, what happened and what came out of it. So I think this turned out to be a pretty good little project, you know. But I appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah. Any questions?
Came of the human remains.
They're at ETSU. They were at UT until 2013. Dr. Jake Franklin and I went down and got all the material from the Eastman dig, and everything now is at ETSU. And all the burials are recorded, and they may have to be reburied at one point with the Repatriation Act. So we don't know, but the Cherokee band know that they're there, and so that will. I don't know what will happen. I mean, with those, but that's where they are.
I hope you had some help in that dig.
No.
Would you repeat what drew you to that particular small spot?
Well, it was. I wasn't working at that time. So like I said, I just moved back 2 or 3 months before I started digging. But it was probably, I felt like small enough at the time. Of course, it turned out to be a lot bigger than I thought. But it wasn't like going in a 10-acre field and, you know, there's a big site in it, you know, with a big camp. It was something I felt like was pretty well isolated, that maybe I could dig. And after I got permission and I went down, you know, 6 feet and I'm still finding material, then I knew it was going to be more than that. So basically, I didn't do any work for a year and a half, 2 years, basically. Yes, sir.
Was there no woodland bison material found there?
No. I don't know of any bison material found on any archaeological site, except for maybe Chota down at one of the Cherokees, which is really late historical. I don't think the bison were here at that time. We had those 2 bison, Antiguous and Occidentals, that were here during the Ice Age. But the modern bison, I don't think we saw those again until historical times, real late. Yes, sir.
The level of that sediment implies there was some pretty big floods around here, wasn't there, at one time or another?
Yeah. In fact, the top of the shelter, well, I didn't have a slide of the cut and fill process, but the shelter evidently extended way out toward the river at one time, and you could see where the river had come through there and cut it off, had washed the front of the shelter off. It was gone. And then the sand, I don't know, for some reason the eddy currents or something during the floods came back and redeposited over top of where it had already been cut and filled it back in. And what was obvious, I've got one slide, I didn't know I have it with me, but there's a fireplace in the side of a wall, and it's sheared right down to almost the middle. It's cut off, and it was real obvious what happened. You know, something took half of it off, then sand refilled it. But yeah, we had a lot of floods here on the lower end of Long Island. When they put 26 across, which is at that time was 181, where they dug the piers, that was 40 SL 8 and 9, 2 sites they found there under the ball fields, from the ball fields. And they found a plow zone, and then they found an alluvial layer underneath that. Then they found an old historical plow zone underneath the sand. And they didn't understand that. Then they studied all the flood records, and there's actually sand over top of the. So if you're looking for any of the old historical, Joseph Martin, where he had a trading post, that sort of thing on the lower end of Long Island, top of the ground's not where it's at. You're going to have to go below an old sand layer and then get down to the historical layer to be able to find anything. Yes, sir.
What was the oldest piece that you mentioned?
I did find a broken Clovis point, which can go, it's Ice Age or late Pleistocene, goes back to 13,000 years, 11,000 BC. And it was the shelter, what was so unique about it, there was material from the Ice Age, all through the Archaic, the Woodland, the Mississippian, and even late Cherokee, and then historical materials. So if you study the Eastman Rock Shelter, the chronological cultures, everybody that came through there left something to be identified. Yes, ma'am.
When you were not digging, did you cover all of this area with anything to protect it?
When I wasn't digging over there, no, I was there like daylight, and I left it dark the 3 months.
I know, but there were times that you were not digging at all.
Oh, no, I didn't. No, I didn't cover it. I left it open. And I knew I didn't think there was going to be a lot of material in the bottom, which there wasn't near as much. I was below all the burials. I was below all the pottery. The earliest pottery we have here is about 1000 BC, 3,000 years old. And I knew I was below all of that, and everything was pretty sparse. I was moving a lot of material, but not finding very much. So I didn't cover it up because I didn't think it'd really be disturbed that much. And it wasn't really. They disturbed the sides of my excavation, but the bottom was actually pretty well protected. Is there any other questions? Yes, sir.
Very fascinating. So people were living on top of those remains. Is that correct?
Yeah, over top of those burials?
Yeah.
Yeah, oh yeah.
They
Yeah.
didn't have any trouble with it.
They didn't know they were there.
Oh, they didn't?
No, they were actually dug. They were in a burial pit.
Okay.
So they were actually buried in the ground, and, you know, we just got through digging a site down on the Old Chucky River. I worked with ETSU, and we found a Cherokee house down there. And there was we knew that before we were walking, there was probably burials right underneath somewhere. We didn't find them, but we just got through, like I said, excavating a historic house, not historic, proto-historic. There were little trade beads and that sort of thing. And we kept waiting to find a burial, and of course we were just going to cover it back up. In fact, people from the Cherokee Nation were actually there 3-4 days a week, you know, in case we did find something in a house. But yeah, you wouldn't know what was under your feet. Yes,
Are there other potential sites in the Kingsport area that haven't been covered?
yeah. There's. I gave a program here about 1.5 years ago or so, I think, and I kind of did a rundown of different things that had been done, and some of the sites that probably had some work yet to be done on. I did Fort Patrick Henry survey for TVA in 1986, and I kind of started there, came down with the Eastman Rock Shelter, then where Horse Creek comes into the sluice, across from Long Island. I dug a site there and found, got 12 carbon dates off of that site. It was an early woodland site, about 1000 BC to 200, 300 AD. And then the Ridgefield site, which is on Riverport Road, was dug in the 1960s. But there are sites in between those that have not been dug. And actually, just to show you how much information that we've got for this area, from the Eastman Rock Shelter down to Rotherwood, where you come into the Host and Defense property down below the Rotherwood Mansion, we've got 30 dates on different cultures and when they were here at different times. So we've got more material here than a lot of places even think about having. It's right here in Kingsport, basically. Yes, sir.
Are you doing work on the drawdown, the areas that's now available for pigs or?
Oh, I'm not doing the work that TVA's got that monitoring program going on, where they got people monitoring sites that they know about on their property. I'm not doing that, but we've got I got a permit from TVA, and Dr. Franklin at ETSU also has a permit, and we've got until February the 28th to look at property that they don't know their sites, don't know if there's sites on them or not, so they want a survey done on their TVA property. And in fact, I think I'll probably be heading to Johnson City today. And we've got our map. They sent us maps, the area they wanted covered in red. And if we do find sites, then they'll probably be added to that monitoring program, you know, that people can then look at and make sure that nobody's disturbing them. Yes, sir.
What do you do now if you run into a burial site?
You can't remove it. You can go to a university, and they have to get a permit to remove or you can't disturb it in any way, basically. And it's basically a felony if you own bones, prehistoric bones, a human. So if you find one, best thing to do is probably just cover it back up. You know, you can let people know. And also now the law has to, every time you find a burial, the law has to be informed, because they got missing people and so forth. So they'll come out and look and make sure it's not. You know, it's not, if it's prehistoric, of course, that's the end of it, but they have to investigate it even. Is there any other questions?
Thank you again.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you.
S.D., we really do appreciate your coming, and I think if you hadn't gotten involved in that, we wouldn't even have known about it. So
Yeah.
thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
And appreciate it. We hope to get you back sometime.
Thank you.
It's a very simple site, but it is discoverkingsport.com, and anything that we hear, we try to at some point get it there. Preferably everything pre-1900, that direction. So you may find some things there. We did find, a friend of myself, might be the oldest cabin in the area where the Indian massacre occurred, and it was taken off the land, but we know who has it now. And when he's ready, because he's going to completely restore it, we'll share that.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Okay, we'll see you next time. Thank you. Carl, how do you put up with it?
Okay. It is Thursday.